The glob of saliva hit Bumpy Johnson's shoulder at exactly 4:23 p.m. on a frozen February afternoon. Union Station in Chicago was packed with travelers, businessmen rushing to catch the evening trains, families reuniting, porters hauling luggage through the grand marble halls. Nobody paid attention to the well-dressed black man standing near Track 7, waiting for the New York Express. Nobody except Tony the Fist Capone, Al Capone's 26-year-old nephew, who'd had too much bootleg whiskey and too much inherited arrogance. Tony stood 15 feet away with 4 of his crew, pointing at Bumpy and laughing. "Look at this," he said, loud enough for half the platform to hear. "Some nuther thinks he can dress like a white man, thinks he belongs in first class." Bumpy didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the slur. He'd heard worse. He'd survived worse. But then Tony walked closer, close enough that Bumpy could smell the cheap liquor on his breath. "I'm talking to you, boy." Bumpy finally turned, his eyes meeting Tony's, cold, calculating, measuring. "You got something to say to me?" Tony smiled, the kind of smile that comes from a lifetime of never facing consequences. He looked back at his crew, making sure they were watching. Then he leaned forward and spit directly onto Bumpy's expensive wool coat. The entire platform went silent. "That's what I got to say to you," Tony sneered. "Now get on your train and get back to whatever hole you crawled out of. This is Capone territory. You people don't belong here." Bumpy looked down at the saliva slowly running down his coat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, monogrammed Italian silk, expensive. He carefully wiped the spit away, folded the handkerchief, and put it back in his pocket. Then he looked at Tony Capone with an expression that made 2 of Tony's crew instinctively step back. "You know who I am?" Bumpy asked quietly. "I don't give a damn who you are. Ellsworth Johnson from Harlem. They call me Bumpy." Tony laughed. "I don't care if they call you the King of England. You're in Chicago now. My uncle runs this city, and what my uncle says goes for every Namur, every Jew, every person who ain't Italian." Bumpy nodded slowly. Once, twice. Then he picked up his leather suitcase. "Tell your Uncle Bumpy Johnson says hello. Tell him exactly what you did today. Tell him you spit on me in front of 100 witnesses." Tony's smile widened. "Why would I tell him that?" "Because in 11 days, he's going to wish you had." Bumpy walked away, his shoes clicking on the marble floor, his posture straight, his pace unhurried. He didn't look back, didn't show anger, didn't make threats. He just disappeared into the crowd boarding the New York train. Tony turned to his crew, laughing. "Did you see that? Scared him off like a dog. These Harlem punks think they're tough, but they know who runs things." What Tony didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Bumpy Johnson had just spent 3 days in Chicago, meeting with people Tony's uncle didn't even know existed. People in legitimate business, people in city government, people who'd been quietly building a network that would soon rival anything the Italian mob had created. And Tony Capone had just given Bumpy the perfect excuse to activate that network. But wait, because what happened next is where this story becomes absolutely legendary. Day 1. Bumpy arrived back in Harlem at 11:47 p.m. He went straight to his office above the Policy Bank on Lenox Avenue. Waiting for him were 6 men, his most trusted associates, the ones who'd been with him since he started building his empire. "We got a problem in Chicago," Bumpy said, hanging up his coat. The coat with the spit stain still visible on the shoulder. Memphis Red stood up. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where Al Capone's nephew thinks he can disrespect me in public and live to brag about it." He told them everything, every detail, every witness, every word Tony had said. When he finished, the room was dead silent. Finally, Memphis spoke. Capone's going to protect his nephew. You know that, right? This could start a war. It won't be a war, Bumpy said calmly, because we're not going to touch Tony Capone, not directly. Bumpy nodded slowly, once, twice. Then he picked up his leather suitcase. Tell your Uncle Bumpy Johnson says hello. Tell him exactly what you did today. Tell him you spit on me in front of 100 witnesses. Tony's smile widened. Why would I tell him that? Because in 11 days he's going to wish you had. Bumpy walked away, his shoes clicking on the marble floor, his posture straight, his pace unhurried. He didn't look back, didn't show anger, didn't make threats. He just disappeared into the crowd boarding the New York train. Tony turned to his crew, laughing. Did you see that? Scared him off like a dog. These Harlem punks think they're tough, but they know who runs things. What Tony didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Bumpy Johnson had just spent 3 days in Chicago meeting with people Tony's uncle didn't even know existed. People in legitimate business, people in city government, people who'd been quietly building a network that would soon rival anything the Italian mob had created. And Tony Capone had just given Bumpy the perfect excuse to activate that network. But wait, because what happened next is where this story becomes absolutely legendary. Day 1. Bumpy arrived back in Harlem at 11:47 p.m. He went straight to his office above the Policy Bank on Lenox Avenue. Waiting for him were 6 men, his most trusted associates, the ones who'd been with him since he started building his empire. We got a problem in Chicago, Bumpy said, hanging up his coat. The coat with the spit stain still visible on the shoulder. Memphis Red stood up. What kind of problem? The kind where Al Capone's nephew thinks he can disrespect me in public and live to brag about it. He told them everything, every detail, every witness, every word Tony had said. When he finished, the room was dead silent. Finally, Memphis spoke. Capone's going to protect his nephew. You know that, right? This could start a war. It won't be a war, Bumpy said calmly, because we're not going to touch Tony Capone, not directly. Then what are we doing? Bumpy smiled, the smile that meant he'd already thought 3 moves ahead. We're going to hurt Al Capone where it actually matters. His money, his reputation, his control over Chicago. And we're going to do it in a way that makes Tony Capone the reason for all of it. He pulled out a notebook, filled with names, addresses, numbers, information he'd gathered during his 3 days in Chicago. Gentlemen, Al Capone thinks Chicago belongs to him. He thinks every speakeasy, every gambling house, every protection racket is his by divine right. But what he doesn't know is that 53% of his revenue comes from establishments run by black operators who pay him tribute because they have no choice. Bumpy flipped the notebook open to a specific page. What if they had a choice? Day 2. Letters went out to 27 black speakeasy owners, gambling operators, and business owners in Chicago's South Side, hand-delivered anonymous. Each letter contained the same message. You don't have to pay tribute to men who spit on you. There's another way. Respond to the enclosed P.O. box if you want to discuss alternatives. Enclosed with each letter was a newspaper clipping, a photo from a Chicago Society page showing Tony Capone at a rally where a speaker had said that colored people were destroying American values. The message was clear. The Capone family doesn't respect you. Why are you making them rich? Day 4, 17 responses came back to the P.O. box. Day 5, Bumpy was back on a train to Chicago, this time with Memphis Red and 2 briefcases full of cash. But this is where Bumpy's genius really shows. He didn't offer protection. He didn't threaten violence. He didn't ask these operators to stop paying Capone and start paying him instead. He offered them something revolutionary: partnership. "I'm not here to replace one boss with another," Bumpy told a room full of nervous South Side operators gathered in a church basement. "I'm here to help you become your own bosses." He opened the first briefcase, stacks of $100 bills. "This is seed money, enough for each of you to pay Capone's tribute for 3 months while you build up reserves. Enough to hire your own security. Enough to invest in your businesses properly instead of handing half your profit to people who think you're subhuman." A speakeasy owner named Jackson stood up. "And what do you want in return?" 10%, not of your gross, of your net profit, and only after you've paid your own people and reinvested in your business. I'm not bleeding you dry, I'm helping you grow." Jackson frowned. "Why? What's your angle?" Bumpy leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "My angle is that Tony Capone spit on me in Union Station because he thought I was nobody. My angle is that the entire Capone organization thinks black operators are just cash cows to be milked. My angle is that I want Al Capone to watch his empire crumble and know that his racist nephew caused it." The room was absolutely silent. "But more than that," Bumpy continued, "my angle is that every black business owner in Chicago should keep more of their own money, should build their own wealth, should stop enriching men who see them as less than human." He paused, letting it sink in. "So here's the deal. You take my money, you stop paying Capone. You hire your own security from the list I'm providing. Good men, reliable men, many of them fresh out of the war and looking for honest work. You build your businesses, and when you're profitable, you pay me my 10%. "And if Capone comes after us?" Bumpy smiled. "That's the beautiful part. He won't know it's happening until it's too late, because you're not all going to stop paying at once. We're doing this smart, surgical." Day 6. The plan went into motion. 3 speakeasies in the South Side stopped paying tribute to Capone's collectors. When the collectors came around demanding money, they were told simply, "Business is slow, can't afford it this month." The collectors reported back to Capone's lieutenants. The lieutenants shrugged. Sometimes businesses had slow months. They'd collect double next month. Day 7. 5 more operators stopped paying. Same excuse. Business is slow. Day 8. 4 more, then 6, then 9. By day 9, 23 black-owned establishments in Chicago had stopped paying tribute to Al Capone. Each one had legitimate-sounding excuses. Each one promised to pay next month. Each one had hired new security, quiet, professional men who didn't make threats, but made it clear that anyone causing problems would regret it. And Al Capone, sitting in his mansion in Cicero, Illinois, still didn't realize what was happening. But his accountants did. Day 10. Frank Nitti, Capone's enforcer and financial guy, walked into Capone's office with a ledger that made his hands shake. "Boss, we got a problem." Capone looked up from his newspaper. "What kind of problem?" "The South Side. 23 establishments didn't pay tribute this month. That's $47,000 in revenue. Gone." Capone's face darkened. "So go collect it. Break some heads if you have to." "It ain't that simple, boss. They all got new security, professional guys, and they're saying business is slow. They'll pay next month." We push too hard. It looks like we're squeezing people during hard times. I don't care how it looks. Go get my money. Nitty hesitated. Boss, there's something else. I'm hearing rumors. Somebody's been talking to these operators, somebody from out of town. Who? I don't know yet, but whoever it is, they're organizing. This ain't random. This is coordinated. Capone stood up, his face flushing red. Find out who. And when you do, I want them dealt with. Nobody undercuts Al Capone in his own city. What Capone didn't know was that by day 11, his nephew Tony was about to connect the dots in the worst way possible. Day 11, Tony Capone was at a bar on the south side, drunk again when he overheard two men talking. Heard it was that Harlem guy, Bumpy something. He's the one helping people stop paying the Capones. Tony's head snapped up. What did you say? The men went silent, realizing who was listening. I said, what did you say about Harlem? One of the men, terrified, stammered, Nothing, Mr. Capone, just rumors. Some guy from New York been around, that's all. Tony's face went white as he remembered. Union Station, the well-dressed black man, the threat, in 11 days he's going to wish you had. It had been exactly 11 days. Tony ran out of the bar, jumped in his car, and drove straight to his uncle's mansion. He burst through the door at 11:30 p.m., still drunk, still panicking. Uncle Al! Uncle Al! Capone emerged from his study, furious. What the hell, Tony? You know better than to... It's my fault. The South Side thing. It's my fault. Capone grabbed his nephew by the collar. What are you talking about? Tony told him everything. Union Station, the insults, the spit, the black man from Harlem who'd said his uncle would regret it. His name was Bumpy Johnson, Tony whispered. Al Capone's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, rage, and finally, something Tony had never seen before in his uncle's eyes: fear. Because Al Capone knew exactly who Bumpy Johnson was. They'd met once briefly at a summit in Atlantic City 2 years ago. Capone had dismissed him then. Just another black gangster trying to make it in a white man's world. But the stories about Bumpy had been growing. Stories about his strategic mind, his patience, his ability to outthink opponents instead of just outfighting them. And now Tony had given Bumpy Johnson a personal reason to come after the Capone empire. You idiot, Capone breathed. You goddamn idiot. Uncle Al, I didn't know. Get out! Tony fled. Capone stood alone in his office, his mind racing. $47,000 a month in lost revenue, 23 establishments in open rebellion, and it was only going to get worse because Bumpy Johnson had 11 days to build momentum, while Capone hadn't even known there was a problem. Day 12. Al Capone made a phone call he never thought he'd make. I need to speak to Bumpy Johnson. The operator on the other end, one of Bumpy's people, said politely, Mr. Johnson is very busy. Can I take a message? Tell him Al Capone wants to meet, in person. Mr. Capone, I'm not sure Mr. Johnson is interested in... Tell him I'm coming to Harlem. Tell him I'm coming alone. Tell him I want to fix this before it gets worse. There was a pause. Then, I'll relay the message. Day 13. Al Capone, the most powerful gangster in America, the man who'd survived countless assassination attempts, the man who'd built an empire through violence and intimidation, got on a train to New York, alone, without his bodyguards, without his enforcers, without the muscle that usually surrounded him like armor, because he understood something that Tony never would. Bumpy Johnson wasn't a problem you could shoot your way out of. He was a problem you had to negotiate with, or he would dismantle everything you'd built, piece by piece, using your own arrogance as the weapon. Day 14. The meeting took place at the Cotton Club in Harlem. Neutral ground. Public enough that either man could make a move against the other without consequences. Bumpy sat at a corner table nursing a bourbon when Al Capone walked in. The entire club went silent, heads turned, whispers spread like wildfire. Al Capone, in Harlem, meeting with Bumpy Johnson. Capone sat down across from Bumpy, his face hard, but his eyes showing respect that hadn't been there at Atlantic City. "You made your point," Capone said without preamble. Bumpy took a sip of bourbon. "Did I? My nephew is an idiot. He disrespected you. I apologize. Your nephew is a racist, and he learned that racism from somewhere." Capone's jaw tightened. "I don't have time for politics. I'm here to stop this from becoming a war." "It won't be a war," Bumpy said calmly. "Wars are between equals. This is just business." "Business? You're stealing my revenue." "I'm liberating people who you've been exploiting. There's a difference." Capone leaned forward. "What do you want? Money? Territory? You want a cut of Chicago? Name your price." Bumpy set down his glass, his eyes never leaving Capone's. "I don't want your money, Al. I don't want your territory. What I want is for you to understand something fundamental. The world is changing. The days when Italian mobsters could treat every other ethnicity like servants are ending, and the sooner you accept that, the better off you'll be." "So what? You want respect?" "I already have respect. What I want is for your nephew and every other punk who thinks his skin color makes him better than me to learn that actions have consequences." Capone sat back, studying Bumpy with new eyes. "You did all this, cost me 50 grand a month, organized 23 operations, built a parallel network in my own city, because Tony spit on you." "No," Bumpy said quietly. "I did all this because Tony spit on me and you would have let him get away with it, because your entire organization is built on the assumption that people like me don't matter, because your nephew felt comfortable disrespecting me in public because he knew you'd protect him." The silence stretched between them. Finally, Capone spoke. "What do you want me to do?" "3 things. First, your nephew publicly apologizes. In the Chicago Defender, full-page ad, his name, his face, an admission of what he did." Capone's face flushed. "That'll make him look weak. He is weak. He's a bully and a coward. Let Chicago see it." "Fine. What else?" "Second, the South Side operators keep their new arrangement. They pay me 10%, not you 50%. You want to do business in black neighborhoods, you do it respectfully and fairly." "You're cutting me out of—" "I'm giving you a choice. Fair partnership or no partnership. Your call." Capone's hands clenched into fists, but he nodded slowly. "And third," Bumpy leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Third, you spread the word. To every mob family from New York to Kansas City to Los Angeles. You tell them what happened when your nephew disrespected Bumpy Johnson. You tell them how I dismantled your Chicago operation in 11 days without firing a shot. You tell them that the era of casual racism in organized crime is over. You want me to make you look powerful. No, Al, I want you to tell the truth. I am powerful. And the sooner your people accept that black operators, Jewish operators, Irish operators, we're all equals in this business, the sooner we can stop wasting time on stupid territorial disputes and actually make money." Capone stared at him for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed. A genuine, appreciative laugh. "You're something else, Bumpy Johnson, I'll give you that." "Do we have a deal?" Capone extended his hand across the table. We have a deal. They shook, the most powerful Italian mobster in America and the rising king of Harlem, making peace in a jazz club while Duke Ellington played in the background. But the real shock came 3 days later. The Chicago Defender ran a full-page ad. Tony Capone's face filled half the page. Below it, a statement. I, Antonio Capone, publicly apologize to Mr. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson for my disrespectful and racist behavior at Union Station on February 18th, 1932. My actions were inexcusable. They do not represent the values of my family or our organization. Mr. Johnson deserves the same respect as any businessman in America, and I failed to show him that respect. I am deeply sorry. The ad was signed, dated, and notarized. Harlem erupted. Chicago's South Side erupted. Every black newspaper in America ran the story, because this wasn't just an apology. This was a public acknowledgement that a white mobster had been forced to bow to a black gangster. It was unprecedented, revolutionary, history-making, and Al Capone, true to his word, told the story everywhere, in meetings with the commission, in conversations with other family heads. The story of how Tony's racism had cost the Capone organization millions and forced Al himself to travel to Harlem and negotiate peace. The message spread like wildfire. Don't underestimate Bumpy Johnson. Months later, Bumpy received a package. Inside was a bottle of 20-year-old scotch and a note in Al Capone's handwriting. To the man who taught my nephew a lesson I should have taught him years ago. You were right, the world is changing. Thanks for not starting a war. Al. Bumpy opened the bottle that night, shared it with Memphis Red and his inner circle. They toasted to the future, to respect, to the end of an era where skin color determined worth. But mostly they toasted to the power of strategic thinking over brute force, because in 11 days, Bumpy Johnson had proven what he'd always known. The most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a knife or an army of soldiers. It's a brilliant mind attached to a man who refuses to accept disrespect, no matter who it comes from. Tony Capone never recovered from the humiliation. He left Chicago 2 years later, moved to Miami, and died in obscurity in 1959. His name became a cautionary tale in mob circles, the man whose racism cost the Capone empire millions. Al Capone, despite his other legal troubles, kept his word. Black operators in Chicago maintained their new arrangements. The South Side flourished, and when Capone finally went to prison for tax evasion in 1931, he sent word to Bumpy, "Keep an eye on Chicago for me." That's the real legacy of 11 Days in 1932. Not violence, not revenge, but a fundamental shift in how organized crime operated in America. All because one man spit on the wrong person. All because Bumpy Johnson proved that respect isn't given, it's demanded, earned, and enforced. And all because sometimes the best response to racism isn't anger. It's surgical, strategic, devastating precision that makes your enemy beg for mercy.